Hello, everyone. Good evening. Thank you all for being here. We're going to go ahead and get started. So hello and welcome. We are so excited to present this Visiting Artist Series talk with zakkiyyah, najeebah, dumas, O'Neill. On behalf of the students, staff, and volunteers at the IU Eskenazi Museum of Art, thank you all for joining us. We're super excited. My name is Mark DaCosta. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm a museum event host and a student studying cybersecurity risk management. That sounds a little dry in a museum, but I studied arts management at one point, so don't shun me. No, I'm kidding. I'm excited because I really identify with your work, zakkiyyah, and I'm excited to hear your perspective on everything. So first, we wish to acknowledge and honor the indigenous communities native to this region and recognize that Indiana University Bloomington was built on indigenous homeland and resources. We recognize the Miami, Delaware, Potawatomi, and Shawnee people as past, present, and future caretakers of this land. The program is supported by the Indiana University Women's Philanthropy Leadership Council and through the Arts and Humanities Council, which is supported in part by a grant from the National Endowment for the Arts in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. The IU Eskenazi Museum of Art would also like to thank the museum's National Advisory Board co-chairs, Greg and Judy Somerville, for championing the museum's contemporary art efforts. We would also like to say a big thank you to the museum's Director Circle and to the IU Foundation's Women's Philanthropy Leadership Council, whose support is critical in enabling us to host First Thursdays and this Visiting Artist talk series. This program is being recorded. For updates and recordings are released to YouTube, please subscribe to Museum News. We're happy to present this program live here in the Martin Commons, as well as live over Zoom. For virtual participants tonight, hi. We invite you to submit questions throughout the conversations by using the Q&A box in your Zoom toolbar. I said hi to the projector, hi to the camera. When we're ready for your questions, when we're ready for the questions, we will look not only to those who are here with us, but we will also consider questions submitted by virtual participants. For those who are in the Martins Commons with us, emergency exits are located to the right of the screen and to the left, as well as to the doors that you entered through in the back. Okay, with me today here are Elliot Reichert, the curator of contemporary art at the Eskenazi Museum of Art, Laura Shepard, public experiences manager, my boss, and zakkiyyah, najeebah, dumas, O'Neill. The Eskenazi Museum values students, and I have the great privilege of introducing the visiting artist. zakkiyyah is a Chicago-based visual artist, educator, and independent curator. Her practice borrows from visual traditions such as social portraiture, video assemblage, and vernacular found family-sourced materials. Currently, her body of work prioritizes social relationships related to queerness, Black women's identity formation, family, social architectures, and the desire for connectedness. zakkiyyah is also a co-founder of CBIM, Concerned Black Image Makers, a collective-driven project that prioritizes shared experiences and concerns by lens-based artists of the Black diaspora. So please, everyone, join me in welcoming zakkiyyah.
No, we welcome you, Mark, for that lovely introduction. Thank you so much for having me here. My name is zakkiyyah.
And sorry, here's a clicker for
Oh, perfect. This is very necessary. Okay, thank you. Yeah, I'm very happy to be here. And thank you all for taking time to come out tonight to this program. I know like in person, things are really awkward and this is kind of surreal. I haven't done an in-person event since I can't remember. I don't know, 2019, who knows? I don't know what time is anymore. Oh, do I point it here? Oh, did that work or did you do that? Oh, you did that. Great, thank you. So I started my practice making images with Black women in my community and that I know. And part of what I do, I like to think beyond just making the images with my collaborators is really trying to also shift language around photography and lens-based practices. And so as I sort of talk about my work and talk about the images, I don't use language such as capture or shoot. I also don't use the word subject either. And so as I'm sort of going through this, part of it is also I'm thinking a lot about trying to expand beyond that those terminologies, because I find that those words are just very violent and they're tied to things that I am not trying to insert within my work, and my work isn't sort of in response to that kind of violence that those words are connected to. And I have a lot of care for the people that I work with. And the people that you see here are Kyle Brooks and Tasha Douge, and they're both artists based in different cities. Kyle is based in Chicago, but she's currently in Paris, living her best life. And grew up and was raised on the south side of Chicago. And Tasha is from New York and is an artist who was really generous to just let me spend time with her in her studio. And most of these I photographed using 35 millimeter film. And I intentionally started using film in 2017 because I wanted to move away from digital. I felt that it wasn't as intimate and slow of a process as it is when you're working with film. And it also really sort of allowed me to be more direct about the kinds of images that I was taking, because I only have like 35 exposures. So I'm like, I gotta make these good or else, it's not gonna be great. And I find that making digital or using digital technologies within the work makes it it's too fast, it's too easy. Your ego is just, I think, overloaded because you just have the option to keep continuing to make an image instead of just focusing in on one image or the image that you're creating. So I'm gonna try to use this this time. This is another image that I made in 2018. Also, by the way, the images that you just saw, one is actually from 2021 and the other is from 2019. But this image was taken in 2018, I believe. And these are my friends, Crystal and Ruth. And so part of my practice, I sort of engage in candid photography outside of just making portraits. And this was a moment that I was able to document where Crystal and Ruth were sort of existing or being in their own space. And I think about that a lot, sort of how women gaze upon each other and how Black women gaze upon each other. And I don't feel that I'm ever necessarily responding to anything outside of that, just really wanting to respond to that intimacy that I'm a witness to. And that is a really, really important part of my work as well. And I'm more so, I'm not really interested in conversations of like an outside gaze, but more so conversations about sort of an internal gaze, like how are we seeing ourselves? How are we seeing each other? And like, what's happening when I'm in this moment and I'm able to look at them in a way that only we might be able to understand, or in a way that is just very present. These are some really amazing images that I was really lucky to make with Darling Shear. I know Darling is amazing. Darling is phenomenal performer, choreographer, dancer in Chicago, and is really kind of an icon in the queer community in Chicago. And this was a performance they did at a queer ran event space called Reunion. And I was able to take these images of them, and I was really drawn to kind of how I felt they were experiencing ecstasy and like joy in what they were doing and wanted to take a photograph of that. Also, another thing I don't openly talk about was interesting is at the end of this performance, Darling came right up to me and kissed me on the lips and then like ran off. And I was like, oh. I was honored and confused at the same time. I was like, you chose me, great. So I like to sort of, before COVID, like if I'm in these social spaces with people that I know or in these queer spaces, I tend to like bring my camera with me and document them. This is Lace in Chelsea, and I believe this image is also from 2018. And one thing that I am always considering is this relationship between interiority and privacy and like the public image or front-facing image. And I'm really thinking about how can I make an image of Black women or femmes or queer folks when they are just sort of being themselves or don't feel the need to perform in a certain kind of way. And I know both of these people are sort of amazing in their own right. They also recently got engaged. So I'm really happy for them. And Chelsea is a Black ecofeminist at Cornell. And what I really love, I'm mentioning that precisely because oftentimes when you are a Black woman who's sort of accessing certain spaces or institutional spaces, there's ways that we're pressured to code switch or like not be ourselves in those spaces. And I love that in this moment, like outside of that, Chelsea is just like herself in this moment. She's like, I'm having a night out, I have my shoulders out. I can see very clearly that in this moment, like she is feeling very confident and she's very aware of her body and she's very aware that I'm taking a photo of her. And I really value those moments as well as similar to Lace. Here on the left side, it's sort of a similar feeling where I can feel that Lace is experiencing some sort of like confidence or they're empowered. And they also gave me permission to make these images with them. Oh, I have to get close to see this because I can't see. Zoe Samouzi is an amazing writer, scholar, and critic. So that's like another thing that I believe heavily in is just like citing Black women within my work and within my practice. And this was a quote that she inserted into the Black Aesthetic, which is a journal that a group of Black art critics and artists are created in Oakland. And she says here, Black seeing is as generative as it is and has the capacity to be subversive, a signification, a calling into being, a negotiation of interpersonal and communal tensions, where the personal is necessarily the greater collective political, complements and contradictions. A Black aesthetic is wholly understood through juxtaposition, the mundane and the opulent, history and futurity, dream state and materiality, family and diaspora, captured stillness and constant motion through referentiality and self-containment. So I share this because those are sort of the things that I'm thinking through within my work, as well as my collective Concerned Black Image Makers. And I have to note, because I was so excited to find this out, I was spending some time in the Black Film Center archives today looking through the papers and documentation of Jessie Maple, who was one of the first Black women to be legitimized as a cinematographer. And she started a organization in Harlem in New York called Concerned Black Filmmakers. And I was like, oh my God, like I had no idea because the public facing name is 40 West in Harlem. But I was really curious about why the Concerned Black Filmmakers was sort of like a hidden, more officialized name and not the public facing name. But it felt very affirming to find that because I'm always sort of thinking about how to position or reposition ways that we have conversations around the work that Black lens-based artists are making. And so this quote and sort of thinking through the Black aesthetic, the way that Zoe puts it, is I feel really foundational to like the way I see images, the way I look at images, and the way I see and look at my own images. Oh, is this the video or the? And before we start the video, I just want to say this is, so just in response or just thinking about some of the things that I've already shared, this was a short video installation that I made for a solo show that I had in 2019. And it's called A Deep Feeling. And it's just sort of a short piece that I made as like a mental reflection and note about why I do the work that I do, but also just as another way to be in communication with those Black women that I want to cite. And some of the women or citations in this video include Alice Coltrane, Nikki Giovanni, Key, also a rapper in Chicago who I really love, whose name is Jasmine, and my mother. So it's not a surprise, but I have an obsession with hands. I have like thousands of screenshots on my computer of just hands. But if we can go to the next slide, please. Oh, there. Yeah, this is it. So just to kind of transition from that work to these pieces, I chose that sort of as a transition because this was the first time that I started making work with my hands, like as sort of like a physical um, kind of like labor that was really strenuous and still is. So I probably have fucked up my back and like need to get that checked out. But it was sort of another way for me to sort of reach for this like intimacy that I'm always trying to feel or like fall into within the work that I'm making. And this was just sort of a way for me to fall deeper into that. And when I first started making these works on paper, I was just sort of writing down text messages or messages that Black women had sent to me. And I wanted to sort of use the practice on paper as a way to further like enforce that or like conjure that and think about these sort of technological exchanges that we have with people that can be very fleeting in the moment or sort of only exist in these digital spaces. But I wanted to sort of make it more than that. So I don't know if this is just me making it something more than what it is, or really just um, like just wanting to like feel it as much as I can. And I would begin like writing these repetitively across the back and forth across the page on paper, and then covering them up with charcoal. And so it's also just a way that I'm like extending or like expanding what I mentioned earlier about this relationship between interiority and like the public image. And the sort of covering up, I've really been thinking about this a lot. And this writer that I really love named Cara Keeling recently wrote this beautiful essay that I read called Looking for M, which is about obscuring queerness and Black identity and sort of taking claim to like the illegibility that is like our existence. That's not always understood in a certain kind of way. And thinking of queerness like as illegibility also, because it's so completely other than this sort of like homogenous way we think about like gender and identity. And so the covering of the paper is really a way for me to make this even more legible for people because you don't have full access to what's happening here, but you get like a glimpse of it. And this is also a video, so we can play it.
Zakkiyyah, I'm just going to take a moment. The first embedded video wasn't visible to our virtual audience, so I'm just going to take a moment to see if I can troubleshoot that. Thank you.
That's totally fine. Thank you. Thank you all so much. When I started doing this, I began documenting my time in the studio, just as like I don't know, just a way to have that for myself. But I also just think it's important for people to see at least how the work is made. Because like I was saying, like there's just a lot that I have to do with my body to make this work. And it is deeply frustrating. I tried to get some of these pieces. Well, I did get some of them framed recently, and I don't think I've ever been that stressed out in my entire career. Like, this is awful. Yeah, we can also go to the next video too. Thank you. Or we can just continue. I don't think we need to see the next one because it might be. Oh, actually, yes. Oh. Yeah, so this is what you just saw. That's kind of like the final stage of these drawings once I'm finished with them. So once they're covered in the graphite and the charcoal, then that's kind of just like me removing the charcoal from the image to sort of reveal the text that's underneath. It's so funny because I did a studio visit with another artist who I have a deep love for, who also works with graphite on paper. And I was telling this about them and he was like, what the hell are you doing? Like, why are you not wearing ventilator masks when you're making these drawings? So I'm like, I took that with me. I'm like, I promise I'll try and take better care of my body so I'm not like poisoning myself. But I think that's also the like masochism of this is like, or at least for me, I do find some pleasure in like the painfulness like of this, and like when my body is like tired, like after doing this, or like my hands are like stained in charcoal. I think there is some kind of like fulfilling experience that comes from that, or like feeling like there's like the leftover residue that I have. I take a lot of pride in that. And even like I'm not wearing shoes in the studio. I'm just like barefoot, like, and I was like tracking charcoal all through the halls of this art center. And I'm like, well, that's part of the work, like, you know. But yeah, now as I'm sort of transitioning or sort of working through this work, I'm finding more or better ways to sort of contain the charcoal. But like part of me is like, I want the charcoal not to be contained because I love that it's in these like institutional spaces, and then people are upset with me because it's being tracked. And then I'm like, well, I don't know. There's just something like, I don't know, some like rebellious part of me that likes that. And this is what the images look like afterwards. And as I've said before, like I am really thinking again, like about that intimacy. And I'm really sort of being more open in my work, that I make the work because I am trying to feel more connected to myself and also like to other people. And also later you'll see it's like this desire to also feel and be closer to my family as well. So these quotes come out of an essay that was written by an art writer and critic named Jessica Lynn, that which we are still learning to name. I did include the full title. The additional title is two photographs of queer women, or two queer photographs. And she says, this image speaks to a part of who I am, how I have found myself in the world these days, how I want to show up consistently as I move across bodies of water and swaths of land. I held on to the photograph because deep down it reminded me of the touch and gaze and comfort I was missing so far away from my own lover. Maybe this then is part of that which is Black and queer and Southern, to be in and out of time, to be illegible to most, our lives captured, become its own text. Oh, it's so far away. An insistent language that only becomes legible if we truly know how to see. So the work that I'm showing right now isn't necessarily an image in the same way as like a photograph, but I'm trying to sort of bridge this conversation between the photographs that I'm making and the work that I'm making on paper. And Jessica Lynn is like one of my favorite writers. Another Black woman who I'm citing here, who I think just gives language and articulation to like how I'm also trying to understand my work in a broader context. And I also love, again, what she's saying here about illegibility. Yeah, and I'm just a hardcore believer about thinking of art and like people that are writing about it, because I think that that criticism is really important, especially as Black women are like engaging with it. Also, I sort of transitioned from that to this because that quote sort of made me think about this project that I'm working on about Lorraine Hansberry, who is a queer ancestor, but also most known for her play A Raisin in the Sun. And I stumbled upon, I stumbled upon 5 short lesbian stories that she wrote under a pen name. So I'm rewriting those stories by hand and sort of thinking through not just her queer identity, but like what it means to sort of have a relationship with her as a person, like through these stories. And I've also been reading like her diaries, her diary entries as well. And so there's this way that like she was just, I think for me is like this avatar for like this, like just a hard example of the interiority versus the public image, or like how those two things are sort of interrelated. And she had to create this alter ego to write these stories because this was like in the late 50s and early 60s. But the stories themselves are just they're very direct, and they're very, very, very queer, very gay. If that's what you're into, please read them because they're so beautiful. And the way she sort of characterizes the characters in the stories, I think in a lot of ways resemble the kind of tenderness or like softness or intimacy that she may have been seeking for her own life at the time. And I just sort of relate to her on many different levels. But I also love the idea of rewriting these stories so that people don't just know that they exist, but sort of can maybe engage with them in a way that is contemporary. They've just been tucked away for so long. Like why people should know about them. So this is the last, these are the last slides, so I'm almost done, I promise. This is in a current exhibition called Raisin at 6018 North in Chicago. And this was curated by an amazing curator, Asha Veal. And I've been working through another project since 2016 about my grandfather, who was an architect in Chicago, and about my desire or like want to know him, not just as a person, but to also develop an intimate relationship with his architectural practice. And I became obsessed with the fact that a lot of the designs that he created were not actualized as physical spaces. And I wanted to sort of take that on as a project to insert my own imagination alongside his imagination. But my imagination is more so about sort of the imagination of, I don't know, what does softness or like liberation or like leisure or freedom look like in these spaces that he created, and how can I sort of think of them as alternative spaces for that? And so the image here is my mother, and right above that is one of the houses that she grew up in, or one of the apartment buildings she grew up in on the South Side. And I think the title of this piece is called 725 East, because that's 725 East 47th Street, which is a street in Chicago. And so a lot of it is also thinking through the geographical space of the South Side and sort of my way of familiarizing myself with that history, because I didn't grow up on the South Side, but I was born there and all of my family is from there. And I live there now. And I also kind of wanted to think through color. I rarely work with color. It like frightens me. I'm like, black and white is like my comfort space. So like jumping into color was interesting here because I was thinking kind of about what I was carrying into the project. And I also listened to a lot of jazz. As I was sort of working through these, as well as some of the other work I've made, I listened to a lot of like, y'all probably don't know these people. Lee Morgan, Miles Davis, Max Roach. Those are some of my favorite jazz musicians. And it's one of the only forms of music I feel that is like completely unattainable. And I just love listening to it. And it's, I don't know, it's just such a, it's just so immersive. And it's what I listen to when I am working on things. But these images in particular sort of make me think about what comes out of jazz and like how I respond to it. And I can't always articulate that, but I can express that through the color and through sort of utilizing these architectural drawings that he left behind. And the image on the right is my father's hand in front of the house where he grew up in Hyde Park. And this is just an installation of the pieces in the exhibit. I think we're done, right? Or I'm done? I'm done.
Wow. Thank you so much, Zakkiyyah. That was a tour de force, really incredible. And I have a lot of notes that I cannot read. So I just thank you so much for sharing a number of your projects. And I think especially I appreciate how you've given us not just the artwork, but the process, and maybe even beyond the process, the thinking, and definitely also the feeling, which is not always so common in these shared experiences that we have in a professional setting. And considering that, I wanted to ask you, going back to the beginning, to your photographic work, which I'm more familiar with, this idea of care and how you speak of your, I don't even know what the word is, because you've outlined that there are not words to be used, right? So to make a photograph, not to take, I mean, there, how do you enter in a space of intimacy with friends, colleagues, peers, and still produce work that you're willing to share publicly as an artist? Does that make sense?
It is very hard. Like it's a constant like tension and conflict, I feel, when I show images of these women, because I never want to feel like I'm exploiting their image. So that was another reason why I wanted to sort of venture into abstraction. Was I was thinking about like, how can I visualize a portrait that doesn't rely on the figure or like the body, and sort of entering into that space. But I think when I do make these images, they're very conversational. So it's not just like, oh, I'm gonna take your photograph. It's like, I want to have a conversation with you, or there's typically a relationship that's already there, even if it's not like super close. Like, I know your name, I've been in spaces with you, I have a sense of like your personality, or you have a sense of my personality. And I also will talk to people that I photograph and I'm like, well, how do you feel about this? I show them their images and share them with them. So like, I don't take images of people and they don't have them. Like, I just don't believe in that. And so yeah, I guess that's kind of how I enter into the work. And like, I've shared this before, but there's been some times where like I will have a conversation with someone for maybe like an hour to 2 hours. And then our last moments together is like me taking the image, because by that time, there's, I don't know, some kind of trust that's been established, or we have a rapport, or like we've shared things with each other, we've talked about our day. And then that's sort of the way to enter into that.
No, it's okay. Mark, did you want to, I know you wanted to ask.
Sure. Yeah, thank you. So my question has to do with your name. I noticed that your name isn't, capitalized anywhere. And so I just wonder, was that, your given name at birth, or was that a stylistic choice that you've made? And how did you make that decision?
Thank you, Mark. Well, not that this is super important, but I'm a Virgo, so details are important to me. And my name is important to me, and it took me a while to accept that my name is like important, right? Like my father, as much as we have conflict and do not see things the same, I do value sort of the way that he instilled certain like Black nationalist ideas in me. And Zakkiyyah is an Arabic name, and it means to be of purity, something that is like of goodness and purity. And because he's in the Nation of Islam, that was why he chose that name. And I also stopped capitalizing my name because I felt that, I don't know, it's like this weird hierarchy of letters. I also know a lot of people who also don't capitalize either. And it made me sort of think more about that. Like my partner doesn't use capital letters often. There's another artist that I have a really great relationship with, Kalechi Guancha, and like we had a conversation about why we don't capitalize our names. Also, Bell Hooks, the scholar, writer, icon, also doesn't capitalize her name either. And so I think for me, it was just a way to practice not creating like another hierarchy through language. And I also aesthetically, I like the way it looks. So.
I was wondering, this is great. That was an unexpected question, actually. Keeping it interesting. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about concerned Black image makers, or you have many aspects of your practice and of your work, and I wanted to know a little bit more about that. How it arose, what you hope to accomplish with it, or what it is even, really.
Thank you. So CBIM, Concerned Black Image Makers, was founded by myself and Lasoft, who is my co-founder, in 2017. And it's funny because we met at a house party. Like we met at a very elaborate house party on the South Side in someone's home. And we didn't know each other, but we instantly just like connected. And from then we would just have these obsessive conversations, like back and forth conversations about images and Blackness and photo. And they're also a practicing photographer as well. But in a more technical way, they are an archivist and librarian. So we sort of were sitting down one day and we're like, why don't we do something about this? Like, why don't we bring Black lens-based artists and Black photographers together? And so that was how it started. And it really started as a way for us to create community with and have conversations with other Black artists that make images with photographs, and who are filmmakers or who might use found photographs to make their work. Initially, it was Black photographers, but I think now we're thinking about just images in general, which is why we don't sort of exclude other artists who aren't photographers. And so we have people in our collective who are art critics, writers, curators, and other practicing artists. Because I think having those different perspectives, I think, is important to shift the dialogue. but also the way that you sort of do the work. And even with my co-founder, like, I mean, we don't always agree on everything, right? But I think it is this way where I'm like, but what does it mean to continue to work with people you don't always agree with, right? Because I think at the end of the day, we all understand like the bigger picture, right? Like understanding like why we're here and why we're doing this work. And we've hosted exhibitions, we've done programs, film screenings. We've also hosted talks where we invite other photographers, filmmakers, lens-based artists to discuss their work. And before COVID, we used to do really informal things like visit exhibitions together, hang out together, do criticisms together of each other's work. And we used to do facilitated readings, which we don't, I want to do that. I'm like, some of y'all need to read. Like, it's like, know what you're talking about. No offense to anyone in the group, but I think that is also, I think, really critical to the work too. And so, in connection to that, just sort of developing our consciousness around how we're thinking, because images kind of rule the world in a way. So it's like, I think it's important, especially for Black people, to have authority over how their images are talked about, how their images are shared, and how they're made.
I have more, but if you do have, oh, okay, great.
Yeah.
Yeah, actually, that's a great point because we're low on time. Yeah, how do we want to do this? Do we have questions from the audience here or out there?
I have one from the virtual audience. It's because they weren't able to see the first video, which I will in the recording see if we can splice that in. But there was just a question about whether you might be able to just describe that first video visually for what they weren't able to see, just a bit of it.
Wow.
And if not, we'll try to insert later. So
No, I love that because it's, I don't know, just, yeah. So I would say the first video there, they are my friend Ruth's hands. In real time, they were moving very fast, but in the edit I made, I alter them so that they're moving slowly. And they're moving slowly on repetition, in circles, sort of inciting or exuding her own sort of chaotic frustrations with being a school teacher, but also moving in a way that is very intense but beautiful. And there's audio in the background of the video, featuring music by Alice Coltrane and featuring voices of several Black women talking about what it is to be gay, to be loved by other Black women. My mother's voice saying that I should call her back and that she loves me. And also Audre Lorde talking about fulfillment and fullness, and Nikki Giovanni making statements about artists being responsible or accountable to themselves.
yeah, thank you, Zakkiyyah. Are there other questions from our audience here with us in the Martin Commons? If not, Mike.
My question is also about your photographs. I was wondering about the space where you're gazing at your subjects, but also being gazed back at by them. And then also that point when you guys are existing for each other through that like gaze, like through a clear platform. Just how do you feel about that, or how would you define that?
So we'll need to repeat the question so the audience.
I will attempt to repeat that. So about the space between the gaze of Zakkiyyah and the gaze of the person that Zakkiyyah is gazing at. I'm trying to be careful with my language here. No, it's really making me think. And I'll leave it at that because I want you to speak.
Thank you for your question. What's your name?
Ethan?
Okay, thank you, Ethan, for that question. What is exchanged? Oh God, how much do I expose of myself? I I don't know how to articulate that. I mean, I think on a practical level, like we exchange in conversation. People have shared deeply personal things with me sometimes in those sessions, or things that they wouldn't want shared in public. I've also, I think I mentioned Audre Lorde earlier, who talks about this concept of the erotic. And I feel like that is something that gives a name to what's happening, where I sort of, I don't know, just experience like some kind of fulfillment or appreciation for just like being in the same space as the other person. And also, I think it can be very, I acknowledge that that space in some ways might be also uncomfortable for them too. Because it is uncomfortable to have your photo taken. I mean, I hate when people take my photo. But I love being up close, you know, with other people, you know, but I don't like my image being taken. And I don't know, I've experienced a lot in those moments, like sometimes like sadness from something that someone told me, or I experience like joy or excitement, or it's very pleasurable to have someone, I think sometimes look directly at you and you're like looking directly back at them, or like there's a moment where you feel like you trust them and they trust you. So I think that is partly some of like what happens in that moment, which is why I'm very careful with how I talk about the way that I make images. And also just expressing a lot of gratitude, because these people can easily say no, or like, you know, some of these women can be like, I don't want my photo taken. And so I really respect them for allowing me to take the image in the first place.
Anything from cyberspace, Laura? Nothing. Quiet out there on the front. I can't see very well out there. If anyone has a question, please feel free to raise your hand. Yes, please.
My name's Zach. I'm just curious, kind of expanding on what you were just talking about, that experience that you have with people that you take pictures of. How does that inform future work or help you grow as an artist?
So how does the creation of work inform the practice and return into the practice, right? Maybe.
Thank you. You said your name is Mark?
Zach.
Zach. Okay, sorry. I'm smart. Zach. Thank you, Zach. I think, I mean, well, for one, I think I'm harshly critical of myself. If you ask people who know me, I'm very, very judgmental of myself, not in a harmful way, I think, maybe, I don't know. But just in the sense that I'm always sort of overthinking, like, what are ways that I could have done that in a different way, or ways that I could have been more mindful or intentional or considerate. And I think whenever I am taking these images, whenever I sort of leave whatever that moment was, I'm thinking like, okay, like, should I have asked them this question? Or maybe I pried too much, or like, maybe I shouldn't have asked them that. Or I often will have people or work with people who will ask me how to move their body when I'm taking a photo of them. Or they're like, how do you want me to pose? What should I do? And I'm like, I don't want to act as like an authority over what you're doing with your body. Like, your body is your body. I'm just here because I want to be present with you, make an image with you. And I think even sometimes how I respond to that, I'm just like, okay, maybe I should have given them direction because that's what they wanted, or they may have needed that because they were anxious or they were feeling awkward. And I think it also helps me grow as an artist because I connect it's another way to connect with people because I feel socially, I may not appear to be the nicest person. And it's not because I'm mean or I'm an asshole. I think it's just I'm very particular about who I choose to give my time to and what I share with them. And so when I do make images of people, I feel like a lot of times it is a way to or a way that I can converse with other people that isn't awkward or not sort of built upon like this whole thing of like, well, who are you? What do you do? And like basically the way that people read each other to sort of assess like how valuable they are. Like I don't experience that when I make an image with somebody. And so I think that's also like that, I think helps my growth a lot because it really, in a way, shifts like how I move through the world or how I might engage with people or like it influences my language around certain things. And I also learn a lot from these people as well when I have conversations with them. So yeah, that's part of it. But I think you can grow as an artist by just being open to critique or not being afraid to critique yourself or just like revisiting your work, which is something I've been trying to do. After I make something, I'm like, why don't I go look at that again or revisit that? So, yeah.
I have another question. Nope, but does someone back there? Okay, I was just curious. So you've been here. You've come here a few times actually now as part of the residency, and I'm just curious how you've been spending your time, what you've been looking at. Is that? Well, I guess you mentioned the Black Film Archive Center, and I was just generally curious, you know, what you've been up to or what you've been looking at. Any previews?
Ooh, previews. I've been looking at a lot of films. I'm a pretty simple person. Like things that are fun to me might not be fun for other people. I like watching a lot of films. I like to read. I really I love specifically to read like short form essays a lot, or like criticism. I've been trying to read more poetry. But what have I been doing since? Yeah, watching films. I went to the Black Film Center archive because I'm looking through the work of Jessie Maple and Camille Billups and also Bridget Davis, who are Black women filmmakers, independent filmmakers. And I'm really I want to develop a more intimate relationship with the archive, but also with these women's lives and reading sort of what their experiences were making films and why they make the films that they make. I've also been to, what is that picture of a lot? Shout out to Chaz. I love her, she's so great. I did a gallery walk that you all had. I'm not gonna lie, it's not a gallery walk in Chicago, but I met some really interesting people and got some really great coffee, like independent coffee. So that was fun. I've also been eating a lot. There's some really great restaurants on 4th Street that people have introduced me to. So I'm like, and I had ice cream for the first time at, what's that place? Hartzell's or?
Yeah, Hartzell's. Yes. Yes.
Hartzell's? Yeah, not for the first time, but like the first time since I've been here. I had some ice cream and it was so great. I was like, this is great. And then also I've been working out of the Cook Center. So if any of you are ever there, please feel free to like come visit me. I'm usually there during the day. And we've been preparing for an exhibit that opens on November 5th that will feature my work, and it will be images of landscapes, which is something I've never done before, but just like adding to like experiences and legibility, thinking of these as like just other portraits outside of the ones that I've done. And I love dreaming about leisure. Like I love like a life or like a future where like Black women can just like have as much access to leisure and not working as possible. So these images are kind of like a way that I've been like dreaming about that and like what it would mean to live a slow life. Yeah, and I'm sure that a lot of that has to do with the pandemic. But I'm all for it.
Yeah, that sounds, I think that's a great place to stop. Leisure.
Yeah. Thank you. And along with what you're saying, it's worth noting that Zakkiyyah is the IU Cook Center first engaged artist in residence. So congrats, that's exciting. Yeah, of course. Thank you so much for your time today. This is an amazing talk. Your presence really does mean a lot to us. So round of applause.
To Mark. Hell yeah. Also, Mark, just for holding this program. Like, I really think you held it.
I had a little help from my friends. Yeah, Laura. So thank you so much, everyone, for coming. Now I have to plug the things that are coming up. But upcoming, we invite you to treat yourself to a self-care Saturday with us for a restorative workshop for well-being, RSVP for a wellness retreat with slow flow yoga and art in October or November. And then also on in November, we have First Thursday again. We'll have student guided tours of women empowerment and art. I've been on the tour, it's amazing. A book discussion about museum-based art therapy, a program with Abby Cox looking at construction and costuming of dangerous liaisons, and an art side chat with Joel Silver in the Douge exhibition. Or explore social justice with self-guided prompts offering thoughtful ways to challenge and expand your perspectives. Then in December, IU Cinema presents virtual screenings of the films When We Gather and When We Gather Together. Artist Maria Magdalena Campos Pons is scheduled, a fan, is scheduled to be present for a virtual conversation and interactive Q&A. Also, if you have an idea for a program that would be great at this Museum of Art, then we encourage you to propose them, whether you're from IU or the local community. And that's why we offer a program called Community Creative. We invite you to propose ideas that are inspired by our museum, connected to our museum mission, and that encourage learning, growing, and becoming a better human through meaningful experiences with art, like we did here today. If selected, we'll work with you to develop the idea into a program. All right, today's program and everything we do here at the IU Eskenazi Museum of Art is made possible by philanthropy. We would like to thank Greg and Judy Somerville, the Director's Circle, and IU Women's Philanthropy Leadership Council again for allowing us to continue providing these free programs to you all. So if you would like to join in and support of the museum, please visit our museum's website to make a donation. Gifts big and small make all the difference. So with that, from all of us here at the Eskenazi Museum of Art, take care and have a good evening, and thank you again, Zakkiyyah.